Welcome to this guide to Incoterms 2010. My name is Steve Townsley, and over the next 30 minutes or so we're going to help you improve your understanding of the new Incoterms 2010 rules. At the end of the tutorial, you'll be able to understand and apply recognised trade terms for your international transactions, appreciate what the different terms mean for both parties, and choose the most suitable term for your business needs. You can check your understanding of the key points by answering the review questions as you work through the tutorial. At the end, you'll have the opportunity to practice what you've learned through a series of realistic simulations. As you progress, you may want to study a more detailed explanation of each of the Incoterms rules. To do this, simply click on the Tell Me More button at the top of the screen. Enjoy the tutorial. The international dispatch of goods involves a number of distinct physical stages. Delivery of the goods to a first carrier or port facility. Terminal or port handling at export. Clearing the goods for export through customs. Main carriage of the goods to the destination country. Clearing the goods at import into the buyer's country. Terminal or port handling at import. Final delivery to the buyer's premises. Before an international sales contract can be confirmed, buyers and sellers should agree who, either the seller or buyer, organises the various dispatch and delivery elements, who initially pays for what in the delivery process. Obviously, the buyer always pays in the end, either directly to the freight mover himself or when charged by the seller on the export invoice. Where delivery takes place. Remember, traders always need to define very precise delivery points. And finally, where the risks and responsibilities pass from the seller to the buyer. This normally takes place at the point of delivery. Both buyers and sellers need a clear understanding of what they're agreeing to. It's important to make sure both parties take responsibility only for functions they can exercise control over. It's also vital to avoid any confusion between the buyer and seller which could result in late or lost goods, unexpected additional costs, or even legal action. To avoid these costly misunderstandings, the International Chambers of Commerce introduced a set of standard trading terms known as Incoterms. The latest version of these terms is Incoterms 2010. Incoterms are a set of trading terms and rules that identify the obligations, costs, and risks imposed upon sellers and buyers when trading goods across international borders. Of course, they can even be used in domestic trade. Each of these 11 Incoterms rules is identified by a three-letter abbreviation. These abbreviations are in common use but are frequently misinterpreted. It's vital that all parties fully understand the implications of each term. Incoterms rules are an integral part of any international sales contract, and they specifically deal with the delivery of goods. Problems can occur in international trade because of differences in such things as language, law, and transport systems. The correct use of Incoterms reduces these problems and gives clarity to the delivery process, minimising possible areas of confusion and conflict. There are 11 Incoterms rules. They are easy to understand and remember if you position them in orders of levels of responsibility for the seller and buyer. At one end of the spectrum, EXW Works places responsibility for the delivery, costs and risks squarely with the buyer. Each subsequent group of terms gives additional responsibility to the seller. At the other end of the spectrum, therefore, DDP requires the seller to take full responsibility for all aspects of the delivery. A key change in Incoterms 2010 from the previous version is the separation of the place-to-place delivery terms, commonly known as multimodal terms, from those that are purely port-to-port sea freight terms. There are 7 terms for use where delivery is from place to place. For example, where goods are to be shipped by road, air, or even in a sea freight container. The remaining 4 terms are purely port-to-port sea freight terms, typically where goods are shipped loose and in bulk, such as oil, coal, and ore. A number of factors can influence the choice of Incoterms used. The most important is the willingness of both parties to perform and pay for some of the tasks involved in the shipment of the goods. It may be company policy to deliver on a particular basis. Exporters will often attempt to stick with one term for all their transactions to avoid the confusions of dealing with different terms for each customer. Or it may simply be the usual practice in a particular market to use a specific Incoterm. The trading relationship and bargaining position of the parties involved may also affect the choice of term. An exporter in a competitive market may offer to assist in the shipment in order to gain a competitive advantage. Other factors include the freight purchasing power of the parties involved. For example, where one party shipping larger quantities can benefit from lower shipping costs. The degree of control required by either side. It may be that the buyer prefers to control the delivery just to support its just-in-time production strategy. The country of import. Some countries demand that payment of freight and insurance is in their own country. The transport infrastructure of the countries involved in the transaction may be a factor. Delivery to a destination port may be the best option where transport infrastructures in the country of import are suspect. The mode of transport. If goods are being shipped by road or air, then traditional sea freight terms would not be appropriate. The type of cargo to be shipped, for example, loose cargo may be loaded directly into a ship, in which case a sea freight term would be best. Finally, the value of the goods shipped can be a factor. Low value goods will be covered by carrier's liability insurance, so there may be no need to use Incoterms that require extra cargo insurance to be taken out. Now let's look at the Incoterms rules in a way that people often find easiest to remember and understand. Some requirements are common to every Incoterm. The seller, for example, always packs the goods and provides the invoice. The buyer is expected to pay for the goods and usually organises pre-shipment inspection where necessary. So, the simplest way to understand and remember Incoterms is to group them by the thing that distinguishes one from the other, the specific delivery point. In other words, the point at which responsibility for the goods passes from the seller to the buyer. Incoterms identifies a number of potential delivery points and provides different terms for each. The term with the least responsibility for the buyer is the E term, EXW. Delivery is at the seller's premises. There are F terms, where delivery is at the buyer's first carrier. C terms, where delivery is at the port or place in the seller's country, but the seller must also organise shipment of the goods to the destination point in the buyer's country. And finally, D terms, where delivery is at an agreed point in the buyer's country. The thing to remember is that as you move from E to F to C to D, the delivery point moves away from the seller towards the buyer. So a good first step to remembering Incoterms is to memorise the sequence E, F, C and D, with each change of letter being a shift in the delivery point nearer to the buyer. There is just one E term, EXW or X works. With this term, delivery takes place at the seller's premises or at another agreed point. The seller must make the goods available to the buyer, packed and marked for export in a manner suitable for the mode of transport. The buyer is responsible for loading onto the transport he provides. The buyer is also responsible for all costs and risks from that point onwards. With the F terms, the delivery point is usually where the goods are handed over to the buyer's first carrier or forwarder. The FCA term is unusual in the fact that there are two identified delivery points. The first being the seller's premises when the seller loads the cargo onto the buyer's transport. The second being where the seller delivers to the buyer's first carrier or freight forwarder at their depot or similar place. The seller is not required to offload the cargo at this point. Care is needed when using C terms. Do not confuse the delivery point with the agreed destination. Under all the C terms, delivery takes place at the port or place of exportation, but the seller contracts and pays for delivery to a destination place or port in the buyer's country at the risk of the buyer. The multimodal C terms are CPT and CIP. With both terms, delivery is at a place in the country of export, but the seller is also responsible for organising and paying for delivery to a destination place at the buyer's risk. The difference between CPT and CIP is that with CIP, the seller arranges not only to deliver to a destination place, but also arranges cargo insurance, usually on behalf of the buyer. The C terms used for loose cargo are CFR and CIF. With the term CFR, the seller's risks and responsibilities end when the goods are loaded onto a vessel at the port of exportation. This is the delivery point. With CIF, the seller also organises cargo insurance, usually on behalf of the buyer. The D terms are all multimodal terms and require the seller to be responsible for the delivery of the goods to an agreed delivery point in the buyer's country. DAT and DAP are the new terms introduced into Incoterms 2010. DAT means the seller arranges for the goods to be delivered to a destination terminal, such as a warehouse, airport or container yard. The seller is responsible for offloading the cargo at that point. DDP simply extends the responsibilities of the seller for all aspects of delivery to an agreed point to specifically include import customs clearance and import legal requirements, as well as any duties and taxes.